Tatiana Siegel, Executive Film Editor at The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm your host for today's half hour with Shiva Baby. Shiva Baby is a new film written and directed by Emma Seligman and starring Rachel Sennott that takes place at a Jewish funeral service, thus the film's title, and centers on a college student who is a sugar baby, thus the film's title. Oh, and there's an actual baby at the service, giving the title yet another layer. We're going to play a clip right now.
Mom, who died?
Abby. Uncle Morty's second wife's sister. You remember her?
No, I don't think so.
She used to play bridge with Bubby.
Really?
Here.
Oh, Mom, I can't eat that.
Why not?
I'm vegetarian.
You're killing me.
I've told you it so many times.
You have not eaten a single thing all day.
That's because we just got here.
You look like Gwyneth Paltrow on food stamps.
Oh, my God.
And not in a good way. You know what Aunt Oz says? She says she thinks you're anorexic. Danielle. Are you listening to me? Hey. Oh, my God. That's Paul and Cheryl Shapiro's nephew. He's so cute. You know what? He has a cousin that works in publishing.
No.
Maybe he can help you.
Mom,
Oh, no.
stop. I have to go to the bathroom.
No, let's go.
Mom,
We're gonna do this.
I don't want to.
Come with
I'll
me.
go later.
Now.
I didn't eat yet.
Come on, come on.
I'll get a number later.
Now.
Stop.
Now.
No,
Now.
Mom.
Now.
Mom.
The Utopia released film was nominated for the Grand Jury Prize Narrative Feature at South by Southwest, and it has won a slew of awards, including Outstanding Screenplay in a U.S. Feature Film at Outfest. I am thrilled to talk about the movie today with Emma Seligman and Rachel Sennott. Welcome. Emma, let's start with you, telling us about the genesis of writing and directing the feature. I know it started off as a short as part of your thesis at NYU.
Yeah, I think for my thesis, I wanted to choose a topic that I felt confident in writing about because I hoped that my short would then be able to withstand and have a feature-length story. So I picked a Jewish family gathering because I felt like I knew those pretty well and I could write dialogue easily. And I also picked a sugar baby character because I related to her, and a lot of my friends and a lot of our female community at NYU were sugar babies. And I think I felt most interested in, as I approached graduation, telling a story about a young woman having to confront different versions of herself and the pressures to be so many different things as a young woman, as a woman in general. But I think when you are going out into the adult world, you feel those things kind of like closing in on you. And I feel like your sex life and your family life don't often interact in the same space. And I wanted to explore, what would happen to someone if she had to experience that. So that's where it came from. And I just wanted to make something uncomfortable and that I could relate to, and hopefully other young women could relate to.
Okay, so I went to NYU and I found this fascinating because there's an actual sugar baby community now, or more recently.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel can attest to this too, because we went to school together, but I think that, it's not new to try to be paying off your loans and paying tuition and seeing older men and, having them help you. As I've learned that's not a new phenomenon, but I think that websites like Seeking Arrangement and apps have changed the culture and made it so much more accessible to young women who otherwise maybe wouldn't have considered that before. And I think dating culture in general has changed, and hookup culture. And I think like Tinder got really big when I was first at NYU. And so I think, I think the transactional relationship of apps like has changed the way, you feel like you can interact with other people. So it's not, even though once you're in it, it can feel and be very, very different than regular dating. It's not hard to access.
It was like Seeking Arrangements. I feel like, I don't know if it began like before we were in school, but when we were in school was when it was like becoming popular. And I feel like it was like everybody at least was like interested in it. Like I had like, sometimes it would be like you would hang out in a group and all make like accounts and just like talk to people and kind of like feel it out. And I think it was kind of like an exciting thing. And then there was like different ranges of relationships and like some people who were doing it all the time to like pay for rent and some people who were doing it sort of for fun or to feel it out. But it was definitely very popular when we were in school.
Emma, you really captured the anxiety that Rachel's Danielle was feeling by the use of a lot of close-ups and also the musical score. Can you talk about the decision-making behind some of those moments?
Yeah, I think that so much of the inspiration for this movie came from, wonderful Jewish romantic comedies that have come before it. And I think I wanted to make sure it stood out, especially because it took place in one day and one location. And I just worried that if the audience didn't feel connected to Danielle and really understood her anxiety, they weren't going to understand why we're just like in this house talking and eating. So I watched a lot of movies that took place in one day and one location, and most of them were pretty tense. And then it sort of led me down a spiral of watching some of my favorite psychological thriller horror movies, like a lot of Cassavetes movies and Black Swan, and the list goes on and on. Krisha from Troy Edward Schultz's first film was a big reference. So I just looked at what they did that was really creative and effective. And it was a lot of close-ups, and it started with cinematography and creating a language there, and then it went into the editing and making sure, well, it went into the acting for sure. It was like trying to figure out like different ways of expressing anxiety as Rachel can remember, so that it's not just like you're anxious the entire time. And then in the edit, we just made sure there was no, room for a breath. Like, we tried to overlap the dialogue as much as possible, which is why it ended up being like 71 minutes. And then in the music, Ariel Marks is incredible, and I wanted something string based and klezmer inspired, and I wanted it to feel really, really anxious. So she just sent me a sound library of violin sounds. That's her specialty, and I just picked my favorites, and it was a lot of plucks and screeches, and it was quite an experimental process trying to figure it out with her. And it ended up being what it ended up being. I didn't expect it when we first began the movie to be as tense as it ended up. I worried it wasn't going to feel tense enough, and so it just kept on pushing and pushing, even into like the coloring and trying to make it like seem like she's going into hell by making it redder and redder and things like that. So I feel really grateful for my collaborators, because each of them lended themselves to what ended up being a really experimental process. You wouldn't really think about all these things for a comedy. So I feel grateful for all these people who are trying something different.
Yeah, and you know what? It's like, I'm glad you brought up Black Swan and Cassavetes, because this movie is so incredibly tension filled. There, like I keep thinking throughout, like, is Danielle going to like confront somebody right now? Like it just has so much tension, like a Black Swan. And yet it's also a comedy, it's like, it's so fresh in that way that it kind of mashes together these two seemingly disparate type of feelings and makes the viewer experience both of them. Another thing I found really interesting, that the characters who were doing the most body objectification of Danielle were women. Tell me about that choice.
I mean, I didn't really go into it consciously. I was trying to pick up from all of the, funniest lines of dialogue, real things people had said to me or my sister or each other from family events. And as I put them all in, only honestly once it got to talking about the movie, once we were releasing it or putting in festivals, did I realize like how much I'd put in there. Or maybe I think when we were doing test screenings, people were like, enough about Danielle's body. Like there was just like maybe one or two, comments we could cut. So there used to be more even. But I think that, yeah, I just picked up on that stuff when I was a kid. I think that when you like transition from being a girl to a young woman, it's like I don't think anyone means any harm by it at all, but I think that and then I guess that does end up being women. I didn't have although it did, sometimes I got comments from men, but not really. I think it ends up being like they're trying to compliment you, but then they're also worried about you. And it comes from love. But it's like, it's very jarring to switch into that. And I think that I thought about all those moments that gave me anxiety, and I was just trying to make Danielle's day, turn into a nervous breakdown. So I threw them all in there, but there isn't like, now that I'm like 26, I don't have that happen to me as much. But when you're transitioning, it's like, oh, like, like you lost weight, or, you have, I mean, I feel like there were worse things I put in there that you wouldn't like actually believe. They would sound unrealistic if you put in there. So I just sort of put in what I've heard, and then sort of the analysis of it has come later in terms of maybe why. If that makes sense.
Sure. Now this is a great time to go to a second clip where we can see a little bit more of Danielle's nervous breakdown in process.
Danielle.
Hi.
Hey, you. You look stunning.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Thanks.
So, any boyfriends?
No, not yet, or right
You must be
now.
so excited about graduating.
Yeah, I mean, like I have like some exams left, and then I have some interviews that I'm gonna
Really?
do.
You didn't tell me. Where?
Well, I don't think you know the places.
Do you still make those little videos? I always thought those were so fun.
I haven't done one in a while.
So, acting is still your goal.
No, it's like comedy, stand-up.
What was your major again, sweetie?
No, she doesn't have a major, Mom. She makes it up. But you got a diploma.
Yeah, I think it was politics. Now, I'm trying to think if I know anybody.
I always remember you were such a humanitarian growing up.
You want to go on that trip and feed the homeless and teach English in the Orient?
My major was sort of like women and gender studies through the lens.
So you could run marches, like with the pink pussy hat.
Yes, exactly. That's such a good idea, right? You love to march and you love to knit.
Our friend Steve Epstein, his son was like you. He was studying what? Philosophy or photography? No, one of those things.
Yeah.
And his parents were terrified, naturally, about his future. I mean, how's he going to make any money, right? But I mean, 20 years later, he's a brain surgeon.
Wow.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah, you might end up being a brain surgeon. Yeah.
Now you can see how 71 minutes probably was a 120-page screenplay, because this is so densely packed with dialogue. Every minute has like, many, many lines. But okay, I would love to hear from Rachel about this matter. You are not Jewish, I understand. Did you do any research to prepare for this role of a Jewish woman?
I think that I guess my main preparation would be talking to Emma about her family and her experiences, and then kind of noticing like the similarities and differences between my family and hers. I think I definitely felt from my family a lot of like pressure in terms of the way, like after college, I went to school for acting and I was like doing stand-up and I was like tweeting about having sex, and my family was like, what is this? And so I think I could draw from some of that, where it's like loving criticism, also the food stuff. But talking to Emma about her family, like events and kind of overlapping the two was really helpful for me.
And how did you two meet?
I met Rachel at the audition for the short film in college, in an NYU like basement, and I'd seen her. I just kept seeing her face because she was in so many like of my friends' films, like their thesis films, or sketches that she'd made, that she'd written and acted in with friends of mine who directed or worked on her stuff. And I didn't realize till later that she was like you know, purposefully like trying to meet as many film students as she could, and like being as, you know, making all these relationships and connections, and skipping class and her like Shakespeare sonnets to do so. And so it worked because I kept seeing her, and then I asked her to audition. And one of the things that I felt like I connected with about her is that she comes from like a huge Italian family, and that I have since met. And I feel like, you know, from talking to her, I could see that like she, like many people, like understand what it's like to go home after being in New York or while you're in New York and have questions about literally everything from so many different family members. So, you know, yeah, that's how I met her.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Birds, like Hitchcock too. Like
Yes.
everyone kind of descends on poor Danielle. Okay, you spend a lot of time in a bathroom, Rachel, but also I assume you as well, Emma, in this film. A lot of the scenes are shot in a bathroom. Were those scenes hard to film and claustrophobic, or?
Yeah, I think that I think those scenes were harder to film because they were sensitive. I mean, I think that like the reason I wrote them was, you know, at like big social events, whether they're family events or anything else, networking, like the bathroom is your escape, especially if you have social anxiety. And they are for Danielle. And we shot them on the last day in the house. They weren't hard physically to do. Like there was like enough room just for me and the DP.
And Rachel, from an acting standpoint?
I think what was great is that Emma and I were able to like talk through those feelings. And I feel like I totally relate in terms of like anytime I'm anywhere and I'm like, I go to the bathroom, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like, who are you? Like, what's happening? What are your morals? What do you believe? Like, and I think we were able to really talk about what Danielle is feeling in those scenes. And like, also because we're best friends, I feel like we have a shared language of like our experiences and like feelings about things. So we were able, I feel like, to tap into where Danielle was at each of those times.
Okay, tell me a little bit about more about your process, like the shorthand, the two of you.
Emma's an amazing director, and I feel like to do this role is like, I was intimidated because it's like all these amazing actors who are a lot more experienced than I am. And Emma like broke down the script with me in so many different ways. Like one, we talked about like the anxiety attack, like not, like Emma said, like not keeping it the same. And so talking about like the different physical manifestations of like anxiety, if it's like picking, sweating, like biting your nails, any of those things. Also like what level of anxiety she was at, and Emma would be like, bring it to a 10, down to a 3, okay, you're at a 6, like as we went. And then like who had the power in each scene, because the power is constantly shifting, and like Danielle is like desperately trying to get some, and it keeps being like pulled out from under her. So all of that, like I think talking about the script and the character before created that shorthand where when it's like in the middle of a scene, I was like, it's a 6, I know what that means. And then just like knowing, I feel like both of us really related in different ways, but like to the feeling of being powerless as a young woman. And like in between the short and the feature, we would go on all these long walks everywhere, but like up and down like the West Side Highway. And like I just remember like crying to you about my life every day on the phone, on the walks. And it's like that shared knowledge, like I think informed the performance and like directing for us too.
That's such a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up about the power dynamic constantly shifting in this film, because it was like a ping pong match or even a pinball machine, because it's like it's Danielle's best friend slash frenemy, sometimes with the power, sometimes, you know, the parents. It's that power dynamic keeps a viewer like completely on their toes, like here, you know. The film was shot on a very quick schedule on a micro budget. and it was pre-COVID from what I understand. What was the biggest challenge of the shoot for both of you? We'll start with Emma.
I think it was continuity because we could not afford all our actors at the same time, especially our principal cast, and we could not afford extras. So it was like me and my DP creating a shot list, based off a Lego set that I had that I'd made of the house, and presenting that shot list once we were in the house to our producers and our AD together, and then going through each room being like, okay, well, on that day we don't have extras, so we're gonna have to figure out a way to shoot it, just to angle it in a different way so we don't see into that room, which should be filled by all these people. Or, does Maya really have to say that line? Can we give it to this character because we don't have Molly on that day? And just being really, really strategic about what we see and how we see it, and knowing what the plan was just down to a T. I feel so grateful. We had such an incredible team. And I also feel so grateful we had so much time in the house beforehand, because it felt like, the main character, honestly, after Danielle, that she has to navigate. And I think the second thing, is that we didn't have rehearsal. So the rehearsal would be while the actors were in hair and makeup. And that hair and makeup, which, I feel like hair and makeup is often a time to be like, how are you feeling? Like, what are you feeling about the scene? But instead it was like, let's read it out for the first time out loud. And that room happened to also be the costume room and the production office and other things. So it was a tight room, and it was just like people were running around with like costumes while like things were printing out of the printer, like for people to sign. And like Diana had her hair pulled back and her eyes were closed, and we were like trying to figure out the scene, because the first time you read it out loud, it's like a table read. You're like, oh, okay, that line doesn't work, like let's try to figure it out. And some of the scenes stayed pretty close to the script, and then some of them we really had to rework because we were like, this does not sound good once we're hearing it out loud. So the fact that we didn't have rehearsal, and the continuity of it all, I think were the two biggest issues for me in terms of the tightness of the schedule and the budget.
Rachel, biggest challenge for you?
I'm reflecting on that room again. I'm like thinking there was always someone like steaming something too. There was like hairsprays. I think my biggest challenge was because of the sketch, like we're working with all these amazing actors who are really busy, and so we would shoot stuff kind of like very like, obviously you always shoot out of order, but like extra out of order, if that makes sense. Like it was like, and I think for me, I wanted to make sure that I like knew where I was in the story. And again, like I was so lucky because Emma would come into like my dressing room in the beginning of the day and be like, the first thing we're shooting is here. You're here, it's crazy. Then you're here, it's sad. And it's like better, more descriptive and much more intelligent than what I just said.
I also just want to say quickly that when Rachel says extra out of order, like we had to split up scenes. So people would be acting across our AD or a PA and delivering like the performance of their life to like, as if they're in an audition. So, it was Rachel, like, and everyone in our cast really had to ground themselves. And I'm so grateful for their abilities and talents.
Okay, so if someone hasn't seen Shiva Baby yet, Emma, what's the one thing that you can say that would get people to go out or stay in and watch it this weekend, go out, whatever?
I think that if you want to have a cathartic experience that, reminds you of any family event or social gathering you've been at that you felt uncomfortable at, I think it's worth a watch. I think I made this so that I felt I wanted young women to feel seen in all those pressures. But I think as the movie has come out, I've seen that everyone can relate to a million people asking you questions and trying to figure out what's going on in your life and being nosy. So if anyone, doesn't miss those days from pre-COVID, although, of course, in some instances, now we have gone back to some events and it feels comfortable staying in, then I would recommend a watch. What about you, Rachel? What would you say?
I was gonna say the same thing of like, if you're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed every day. It's like watch the movie and then be like, I'm actually relaxed. Something along those, definitely cathartic. Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have. So thank you so much, Emma and Rachel, for joining us today, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Great.